First of all, Corinna, I love when you use the word past my trauma. I appreciate you not using the word overcome. That's my pet peeves. I love languages. Languages are intricate. And as you know, as podcasters, it's a lot of words, a lot of language, a lot of connections. I like the way you said passing your trauma because you can't overcome your trauma. Whether you like it or not, it becomes part of who you are. It's not who you are, but it's part of who you are and your experiences. So moving past it is the way, because you have to move past it. You can't overcome it. You can't overcome a part of who you are. That's not possible.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Hello and welcome to Care More, Be Better, a Circle B podcast. Each week, I invite you to care more so we can create a better world together. In my laser focus to create a better and greener world, I've decided to plant a tree for each new subscriber on my website, circleb.co. You'll be the first to hear about new episodes as they drop, receive how-to guides to help you live a little better and a little greener. So join our circle on circleb.co. Today, I'm joined by Benoit Kim. He's a U.S. Army veteran and former policymaker turned psychotherapist and podcaster. His show, Discover More, is a top-ranked podcast in the science category and is in the top 1% globally. He even serves as an aspirational psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist. I can't wait to get to know a little bit more about him with all of you today. Benoit Kim, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on. Very excited to be on.
Well, we have a couple of commonalities. Many of my listeners may not know, but Benoit is my maiden name. So I grew up having to pronounce that correctly for people every day of my life, it would seem. I wanted to ask you, what's it like growing up with a name like Benoit as your first name?
That's an interesting question because I'm a third culture kid, and cultural assimilation is an area of life where I had to spend a lot of time thinking about and adjusting to. I share that because I've always been too Asian for my white friends and too white and Western for my Asian friends. But I'm not a fully American. I'm not a fully air quote Asian because as a Korean American, I was born in Paris, France. That's why my name is French. As you know, Benoit means, it's the same Benedict, it means a blessed one. And then I moved to Korea for a year, and then I moved to China for 6.5 years. And then I came to the United States at age 15, went to a boarding school all by myself with my younger sister. So to answer your question, it feels interesting because I had to really think a lot about who am I in this world. And I realized I'm a global citizen. I could truly say that I'm a global citizen because I spent the first half of my life in 4 different countries and 3 different continents.
Well, you're truly at an intersection. We talk a lot about intersectionality in today's language and culture. And what that typically means in this day and age is it's one part sexuality, it's one part culture, it's one part minority or maker class or socioeconomic. There are all sorts of layers that are added in. But I can tell you as a kid, my name was always mispronounced on first blush until people understood OIT could be pronounced wa. Until high school, when I started to get made fun of for the last name of Benoit because of Benoit balls. So I didn't know if that came into your daily life, but it did for mine for a while when I was being tormented.
Exactly right. I think that's a reference from Anchor, I think one of the Cartoon Networks or shows. But I do remember people saying that Benoit balls all the time. And again, it's thinking back, they become like fun and interesting, funny stories. But in those moments, I think that's like a glimpse of what it feels to be misunderstood and not having your full-blown identity being respected or honored.
Yeah. Well, I alluded to the fact that there might be a second commonality. It turns out that we shared a friendship with the host of one of my favorite podcast shows, and that was Kate Wallinga's show.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, rest in peace. She passed on in February this year after a long time struggle with both brain injuries and some other physical issues that she encountered. Her show is called Ignorance Was Bliss. I was on her show, you were on her show, and then you also had her on yours. After she passed, I republished our episode, and that wasn't too long ago. That was just in February this year. But I have to tell you, it was really nice to go back in time and to listen to her perspective and interview you as part of my education around what I wanted to talk about today. One of the things that you discussed together, I think, was the power of conversation and language and some of these skills that we may have kind of lost, it would seem, in our current era. How we need to focus on connecting powerfully and paying attention, and how having kind of this focused conversation is something that's difficult to do sometimes as a podcaster. You might have your list of questions you want to get through, but not really be following what's actually happening in the present. This is something that I, on my best days, I think I do pretty well. But it also caused me to wonder, I'm like, wow, I wonder if he's going to be critical of our interview today.
I do, if you don't mind, I just want to share some quick tributes to Kate.
Oh, please. I will always accept tributes to Kate.
I met her a year and a half ago. And as you said, I had her on the podcast, and then she was on my podcast as well. And I'm really grateful because when she was on my podcast was one of the last few limiting opportunities where she was her best self. This was before she entered hospice care, and this was before her health really deteriorated rapidly so. And as you know, she's been dealing with health complications for 10 plus years. Since her first TBI from birth and things like that. I share that because I remember in terms of who's really thoughtful, in terms of someone who's doing podcasting for all the right reasons. And I remember something she said famously. She said that podcasting is a full-time effort for a part-time pay. And because of her physical disabilities, she was stuck in her basement most of her days. And she has a very loving and caring husband, of course, and her children. But she really opened my eyes to why conversations truly can be bread and butter and source of life for a lot of people. We often forget because you and I, we started this as a passion project. Now it's become part of our businesses. And sometimes we get lost and disconnected from the genesis of why we started this. And I think Kate is someone who really demonstrated and displayed that for her 5-6 years of doing this, she stuck to her core, and she says that you matter. End of her call every podcast, you matter. You really matter. Because she's the one that reminded me when I was feeling lost, because I've been doing this for 5 years too. She said that please don't stop, because you never know who's out there waiting for your episode to be released every week. You don't know that so many people who are thirsty for these conversations, because we don't know people's circumstances. So I appreciate you bringing up Kate in the forefront, because I was really sad and it really hit me. I was having some existential distress, using clinical terms, when I found out about her passing and her death. So rest in peace and rest in power. She really made an impact in a lot of people's lives.
Well, and I felt that her approach to the conversation was very disarming. And so I felt like I learned something talking to her. And I always took away something from the episodes of hers that I listened to, whether or not I was initially interested in the topic, because she always came at it from a perspective of curiosity. And if I was to define a single word that I felt I always hoped to empower and embolden in myself, and that would be curiosity. Because I think remaining curious means that you're always coming from a perspective of wanting to learn more and of being open and of understanding that you don't know everything. And sometimes I think, especially when we get expert in a field, there's almost this temptation to come at life for your perspective from a perspective of, I know better than this other person. And frankly, that doesn't create open dialogue, and you stop learning and you stop growing. So I loved that about her. And it was something that made me want always more. I felt too that she embodied the principles of collaboration, that she understood that together we could have a better effect, that she was very giving and open with her community, and that came through. And so while she might not have been trying to farm for likes on social media or grow in the more conventional way of a podcaster, she was growing by being so transparent in her journey And I mean, frankly, her work was brilliant too, working as a forensic psychologist. So hearing her come on your show and share the essence of her perspective on that was really incredible. So I wanted to tell you, I reached out to her husband before I republished her episode on my show, and he granted me permission. And he said, if anyone else you know has interviewed her or vice versa and wants to re-air it, I would welcome that. I just love the idea of her voice hitting people again, now that she's gone. So maybe you'll decide to do something along those lines, in part as tribute.
One last comment I'll say based on what you said is, there is a famous Japanese philosopher, I forgot his name, but he says that everyone dies twice in this world. The first death is a physical death of mortality. Your physical body decays into nothingness. But the second death is when the last person who is alive no longer murmurs your name. The last person on this world no longer remembers you. You've forgotten entirely. So in that sense, that's the ultimate death. The footprint and existence of who you were is no longer there. But with Kate, you and I are literally talking about him right now, talking about her legacy. So in that sense, I'm sure Kate will be proud of the fact that she's still alive in a lot of people's lives. And she's at millions of downloads, millions of listeners. So again, I really appreciate you bringing and talking about Kate.
Well, thank you. So as I alluded to in our opening, you've done quite a bit of work as a psychotherapist, transitioning from working in policy. And I mean, this is a full pivot to something like working as a psychotherapist. And then also moving into experimentation realms. I call them experimental this phase because they still aren't broadly used, of working with psychedelics to help people heal from trauma. So I wanted to open this conversation there because personally, I mean, I've had trauma that I feel psychedelics have helped me with, though I've never gone through any formal guided, I don't know what you want to call them, mind walks, journeys. I've never done that, but I have used them recreationally on my own with the intention of working through some of these traumas. And I felt like I got a lot out of that, more so even than working through just a standard protocol of being in therapy. So I wanted for you to have the opportunity to talk about how you utilize these things today, what you've personally learned from them, and how we might, as a greater community, think about the use of psychedelics as something that can open our minds, help us remain curious, and heal.
So if you don't mind, Corinna, I want to sort of go backwards and start from the end in terms of what are some of the misconceptions and myths around psychedelics. A lot of people call today the era of, or the Renaissance era of psychedelic. I'm not a fan of that saying because Renaissance implies that it is new. Now we're in this open era for everything that's possible. But psychedelics been around human civilization for eons, thousands and thousands of years. And prior to 1960s, when Nixon declared war on drugs, as you know, the psychedelics were readily available and were utilized with wealth of research. And a lot of clinical benefits were established then. But then, Tim O'Leary, as you know, gone a little bit too far to the far end, to the ethers. And his flight kind of took off metaphorically and never landed. I think a lot of spiritual folks only focus on the being. We are human beings. Being is important. The spirituality is important, but we're still mind with a body. So we do have to stay grounded on this world. And I think Timothy, he kind of forgot the human parts. He went a little bit too far. And the government, the landscape, the culture were not ready for what he had to share. So again, a lot of, I think, sustainability and progress, which is the ethos of your podcast, I think is contextualized and predicated on the landscape, the institutions, the mechanisms, the systems in place. So let me talk, with all that being said, psychedelics are not what's going to make someone go crazy. That is not true. Of course, there are some red tapes and there are genetic variabilities that could contribute to risk factors. I can talk more about that as part of the guidance that you talked about. Also, psychedelics is not a cure-all, be-all. It's not a miracle drug. It's not something you just pop and bam, all your problems are gone. Your life is magically approved. Rainbows and sunshines that's not the case. It requires tremendous work. And just to preface, my expertise is specific to MDMA and psilocybin. There's a long list of psychedelics, but for me, I specifically researched and done a lot of work around psilocybin and MDMA specifically. So the best way for me to describe what the efficacy or the effectiveness of psychedelics are in terms of containers of healing and trauma, like you talked about, is I want you to imagine strapping a GPS onto a rocket ship. You know where you're going based on the intention setting. We call that flight instructions using Johns Hopkins MAPS, Psychedelic Research Center, instructions to take flight, quite literally. Because as you know, psychedelics are that powerful. It is a very potent molecule with great ontological benefits. But imagine, how does it work? Rocket ship is launching at such a pace that GPS is not going to do anything. You know where you're going, but you have no idea how you're going to get there. I say that because it's that powerful. You don't get to control the directions or the journey. You only get to control the intention that you set in the beginning. And intention setting is a prerequisite for every guided psychedelic by a qualified professional. Please don't find someone off the streets or on Craigslist saying that, hey, I'm a shaman, right? Please your vetting, please your rigorous research, because it is very powerful. But I share that to close out this loop because rocket ship accelerates at a very, very accelerated pace, like you talked about. It is very, very effective. And science is clear. We're on the final stage of approval with FDA. FDA's advisor, they just shut down MDMA as a clinically approved usage as a therapeutic modality. They just shut that down. So we're in the process of appealing that decision based on the research. But if you're hoping to derive and obtain 10 years worth of therapeutic effect from psychedelics versus traditional weekly therapy, 1 hour a week for 10 years, it is possible because the insights are profound, but the conditions are you have to be willing to put in 10 years worth of work. You get what you put in. And that's why I use a rocket ship, because you need the fuels, you need the conditions, you need the setup, you need the guardrails, you need the support of a professional. But the efficacy is clear. I tell people and my patients that I'm not in the business of convincing. Science is clear. Evidence is out there in terms of the clinical efficacy of psychedelics. So please do your own research. But I do want to preface that there are red tapes and there has to be some guardrails to really maximize and optimize the process.
Well, I have to say, I heard you on another podcast talking about the use of psychedelics. And one of the things that a proper guide would do is position for the person going on that journey that they may have a feeling of being deconstructed or of going through something that is akin to a death of the ego or the soul or no longer existing. And this is something I was prepared for when I was using psilocybin, similarly, with a small group of friends. And my personal intention was set that I wanted to confront my own perception of mortality, right? Because I felt like I was living in fear in some ways, in a way that didn't help me, wasn't serving my growth. And as fate would have it, I did fully deconstruct, right? I got to the point where I felt that I was a figment of the imagination of my friends that I was with. Like I no longer existed. I was up in the ether and I had to be okay with that. And I was able to observe the world around me in a different way. And so in this case, because I was confronting my own mortality or confronting the idea of a world in which I didn't exist in this corporeal perspective, I found it healing. I felt like my body was bathed in just kind of a warm light. I don't know how else to put it. It wasn't that it was light, but I felt like I was bathed in a warm light. And I came out on the other side as I descended from being, incredibly high. Let's be real, like you're off in some other space, that I felt more grounded, that I felt more real in my own body. And articulating that was tough to do. But I also found that I remembered more of this journey and this trip than any other I had been on prior. I had used both lysergic acid as well as psilocybin in the past, never ketamine or some of those other mind-altering drugs. And I had never set my intention before. And I think that's part and parcel to the reason that it didn't stick with me in the same way. So I'm not suggesting that people go on their own journeys without guidance, because I think if you're not prepared for that, it can be incredibly disarming, and you could end up in a situation like that of Nick Cave's son, who ended up leaving this world by falling off of a cliff face. I mean, that's life ending. He no longer is with us from the age of 15. Now, had he had a proper guide with him, would that have happened? Likely no. Perhaps he thought he could fly, right? And I think understanding that something like this, psilocybin or lysergic acid or whatever other psychedelic that you might be working with, has the ability to provide you with that deep of a hallucination. I mean, it's real, it's possible. And that's why I think it's safest always to have a guide. That's my perspective, and one I'll probably rest with forever. So how might somebody get started if that's something that they're interested in pursuing? Because I know the legalities are different on a state-by-state basis and also country by country, because, this podcast is available globally.
So real quick, a quick preface before answering that question. I talked about ontological shock just now, I alluded to it. As you know, ontology, it just simplifies the study of reality. That's what ontology means. And ontological shock is a mechanism for someone to experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Simply put, you come back from a battlefield or you had a very traumatic experience like sexual assault, for example. Your reality breaks. We call that reality breaking moment. That's what ontological shock is in layman's terms. You're unable to reconcile with the new reality with the world that you used to know based on your sense of safety. That's reality breaking. And if that reconciliation process doesn't happen through guidance and support, you develop PTSD over time. This is very oversimplified. Psychedelics uses the reverse mechanism. It creates and induces ontological shock when you take psychedelics, and it breaks your reality from what you used to know to who you want to become. That's what you did through intention setting. I share that because there are some red tapes before I answer how can we utilize this in a safe way for a global audience or whoever is tuning in. If you have heart disease in your family, if you have severe mental illness in your family history, like schizophrenia, bipolar, and so on, you cannot use psychedelic. It will trigger your dormant genetics within you, since a lot of these schizophrenia or severe mental illness genetics are dormant. Dormant just means asleep, using fancier words. Is psychedelics have the likelihood to activate that. And once your dormant genes gets activated, it's non-reversible. It is permanent. You'll have to live with medications and therapy support for the rest of your life. And so the risk is very, very high. So that's a real reason why you need medical assessment and comprehensive approach with a guidance. It's not just to guide you through this intensive and powerful experience. It's also to make sure that you don't have these genetic markers that allows you to get activated and go on to a person living with severe mental illness for the rest of your life.
So this would be the example of someone like a schizophrenia issue or something to that effect.
So that's a complicated question. There's a lot of contributing factors. But for example, let's say I have dormant genetics. Let's say my aunt or my father or grandmother has schizophrenia. And let's say I was able to live 26 years with no issues, no voices, no visions, no delusions. I just have a very air quotes normal life. And normal is not a bad word. It's just statistically in the middle of the bell curve, just being the norm. And then stress is the biggest activating factor. And we can talk about stress too. Stress will trigger your dormant genetics. So remember, I talked about ontological shock. Psychedelics are extremely stressful to your neurology and your just neurobiology, because you're breaking your reality voluntarily. So that's why that could activate your dormant genetics. And once it's been air quote awakens, you cannot go backwards. You can't turn it off. It's permanent.
Wow. I did not know that. I think many of us who might have been a part of drug culture at any point in our lives know the person who has, gone too far, as we might put it. Like they might have taken LSD and then suddenly it didn't seem to come fully back, right? And that it was quite frightening for that reason, but often was young men, like in their later 20s, which is also something that tends to be when schizophrenia will typically emerge. And while I should mention this podcast is not meant to treat, diagnose, cure, or do any of that jazz. We're just doing this for informational purposes and educational. I should probably say that, right? No patient-provider relationship is provided between Benoit Kim and my audience. There.
I'm off the clock.
Seal off the clock. Seal a bow around that one. But I find it so intensely curious in a way, because shouldn't opening the mind be something that universally supports our growth? And essentially what you're saying is, in some cases, no. That opening is actually a change in certain people, and kind of, it's like the tap that remains open, if that makes sense. I don't know how else to put it, but I could see how something like that would make it harder for somebody to exist in what our society is, if they were to like venture into the space and have bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm. I love when you said that you're intensively curious about why shouldn't an avenue or a vehicle that allows us to expand our minds be available for everyone. I just had an analogy pop into my mind. I'm a very visual thinker, if I may. So I want you to think about on your first dates, because I think I want to talk about trust, and I'll promise I'll make this fit. A lot of people say humans and humans there's trust, or a lot of clients come to me saying that I feel like my partner doesn't trust me anymore. And I ask, why not? And they'll tell me like a very isolated specific example. They didn't want to share their entire banking and financial information with me, so they don't trust me. I said, okay, are you guys married? Are you guys engaged? They're like, no, we've been dating for a year and a half. I said, so why do you have the expectations that they should be letting you into every facet of their life, including their finances, which is the most sacred protective piece for a lot of us, because this is very sensitive information. I bring that in because let's say, Corinna, you go on a first date with a stranger. You trust that person enough that he's not going to murder you on first date. So you go into the first date. So you have the basic trust that there's some safety. I'm sure you've done your research. I'm sure you did your assessments. I'm sure you picked a public place where there's other people around. So you trust that person on a fundamental level as human to human that you will not be murdered on first date. So you go on the first date.
I mean, in my smarter days, I might have actually let them pick me up when I wasn't as wise, to my own peril. But yes. Right.
But there's it's a gradation of trust. There's different tiers of trust. Mm-hmm. But then you wouldn't trust that person enough saying that, hey, I know we just met each other. This is our first date, but I want to have 6 children with you. And I want to show you my social security number. I'm going to bring you home to my family next week for Thanksgiving. No one does that. It doesn't make sense, right? So why am I sharing this example? That's what psychedelics are. You don't want to start at level 100. Sharing your social security information and your banking information with your significant other, you will get there if you're married, if you have this committed relationship, that you share everything. That's a natural progression. But no one in their right minds will start there. It doesn't work.
Well, I did have a first date where somebody told me they wanted to have children, like on the first date, and it felt like an overshare. And at first I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to let it slide. There was other chemistry there. I thought everything was good. We go to a bookstore in downtown Santa Cruz afterwards, and he is gravitating towards a birthing book that like goes all the pictures of childbirth. And he's like, I can't wait to be a dad. I'm like, this is just too much. I mean, I'm 24. It's our first date, and no. So the language at the end of that date was, it was nice to meet you. Not like, let's keep going. And that can be a thing. People perhaps need to guard themselves just a bit in that first interaction or that first set of interactions. And some of us don't know that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that having some boundaries is important. But I want to make this connection where I think it's about connection. It's about boundaries as well. But it's also about recognizing that this is a process. I think instant gratification has really permeated to every asset of our society. People want healing yesterday. One day Amazon delivery, not fast enough. I want it within 24 seconds. The moment I purchase something, I want it to be delivered at my doorstep. That's what people want now. So that it's a degree, it's a journey. So start somewhere. Start with the therapy. Start with the mindfulness practice. Start with the daily meditation practice of 5 minutes a day. Learn to see how does it feel like to be sitting with your own thoughts and feelings. Because being lonely is different than being alone. I love being alone. I appreciate aloneness, the solitude. I'm very comfortable with who I am and the person I'm becoming, but I don't like being lonely. Because as you know, loneliness is the number one killer today. It kills more people. It causes more depression and suicide than any other causes. Loneliness truly is a killer. So learn to be sitting with yourself first. Because when you do psychedelics, this will be 5 to 7 hours of nothingness but you in your internal world, plus the insights and whatever information may flow through your mind at that time. So finally, to answer your question, this is why we cannot start with psychedelics. So it is a powerful vehicle for change and insights and progressions and transformation. But just like you wouldn't share how many babies you want to have on first date, start small. Meet someone first, get to know each other, have some small talk, share some of yourself honestly without lying to them, and then see where that leads you. See, do you feel safe? Do you feel comfortable? Is this the right vehicle for you? Because reading helps you grow, therapy helps you grow, psychedelics help you grow if used safely and properly. So there's many different vehicles to change. But this is the one I wanted to really make it highlight and emphasize.
So how might somebody know whether or not they happen to have one of these disorders that they should be really open to and watch for, and which they might want to seek therapy to discover and to confirm?
That's a great question. So a lot of folks in the family, especially if you're from an ethnic minority like myself, I don't know about your culture, but family don't really talk about their mental illness or their situations, especially intergenerationally. So if your family is honest, ask them, hey, do you know anyone in your family history with heart disease, with severe mental illnesses, anything like that? And a lot of times they're not going to tell you, even if they do know, or sometimes they don't know. They have no idea. So the best way is to do a neuropsych assessment or speak to a physician. There's a lot of blood work you can do. There's a lot of neuropsychological assessments you can take. Your insurance may not cover this if you live in the United States, but that's the safest way to make sure there's no risk factors, and you do this in consultation with a psychiatrist or a mental health and a physical health provider like a medical doctor.
So understanding that somebody here might have experienced PTSD in some way. Mine came from sexual trauma and from living on the streets for a little bit. I ran away at the young age of 13 because I didn't have a safe situation at home. And, in that period, I saw a lot of things that I care not to repeat on this podcast. And, ultimately that left its mark. It took me some time to get through that. And I frankly thought I had solved everything. Like I felt like I'd addressed it enough. And I'm part working through psychedelics, but just through my own journaling, connection with friends, telling of the story, kind of reformatting how I looked at things. But I also understand that every time you retell a story, it changes. And that we have this neuroplasticity to our brain, which means that memories aren't exactly completely accurate or true. And so I think this might be part of the reason that by experiencing something, we sometimes re-traumatize ourselves a bit, but it also can wear away the sharp edges of these negative experiences. Now, you're using psychedelics in a way to help people really completely remap how they deal with these particular moments from history. But even just retelling the story in writing or with a friend, I think helps to smooth it, if that makes sense. At least that's how I've felt. But it's still there. And it's still a trauma. And I still find myself somewhat triggered from time to time. I've always hated this term, triggered. And in part, I think because It's an accurate description of what sometimes happens to me, and I don't like that, right? I don't like that it's possible to be triggered. I want to be able to be past the trauma. So, what wisdom might you offer someone in my situation, whether or not it's exactly the same, to help them potentially connect with somebody like you, to consider how they might, I don't know, address that thing that they might finally have admitted is a bit of PTSD?
First of all, Corinna, I love when you use the word past my trauma. I appreciate you not using the word overcome. That's my pet peeves. I love languages. Languages are intricate. And as you know, as podcasters, it's a lot of words, a lot of language, a lot of connections. I like the way you said passing your trauma because you can't overcome your trauma. Whether you like it or not, it becomes part of who you are. It's not who you are, but it's part of who you are and your experiences. So moving past it is the way, because you have to move past it. You can't overcome it. You can't overcome a part of who you are. That's not possible. So there's different ways, right? Because I like how you talked about triggering, and this is another commonality. You talked about your sexual trauma, living on the streets since 13. A lot of my patients they've experienced homelessness. So I know the very, very dark and difficult reality of that. As you know, I also experienced sexual trauma myself. It took me 7 years to heal through and move through my own sexual assaults. Of course, a lot of people are aware of women being sexual assaulted, as they should, right? But then a lot of people don't know that sexual assault is bidirectional. Impacts all genders, all personhood. It's not only for women. According to the latest statistics, about 1 in 7 men get sexually assaulted. That's a very, very high number if you do the math, and I was one of them. I tried a lot of different avenues to heal through it. It just didn't work. And like you said, triggered. And I think to get triggered, you have to have a level of self-awareness. To get triggered, you've done some work. Okay, there's different levels, right? There is being aware, which is where you are, where I am. There is being subconsciously aware, but suppressing it. And then there is the deepest level, which is repression. People use suppression and repression interchangeably. They're different. Clinically, suppression is consciously pushing down your hurt, your pain. You're consciously choosing to use alcohol or different substances to forget the pain, forget the suffering, to escape. Repression is done unknowingly. You cannot access the repressed memories of the repressed trauma. It's not possible. It's unconscious. But psychedelics allows you to get there, or EMDR, or a lot of trauma-based therapy modalities allows you to move past the resistance of your guardrails, the walls psychologically that you built up, the psychological firewall, so to speak. So again, to get triggered, you have to be aware. But again, I don't think getting triggered is a bad thing. I think for me at least, I want to normalize what it feels to be triggered. Because to be triggered, it means that there's opportunity for growth. And I'm not invalidating the hurts, the memories, the memory consolidation that you talked about. I love when you said memories change over time. You know, people say in hindsight 2020, that saying is called narrative fallacy in psychology. That's the term. Narrative fallacy. What that means is by us retelling our stories from this framework of hindsight 2020, it gives us the illusion that we knew exactly what happened. We knew exactly how this world worked. We know exactly how the stories unfold. That's a fallacy. We think back and everything's rosier. And as you know, memories are not stored. Memory recall is actually technically incorrect. We don't recall our memories. We reconstruct based on cues, the smell, the visuals, the word. That's why you get triggered, because then you're calling back or you're reconstructing the memories, right? But reconstruction implies errors. Reconstruction implies there's room for mistakes and misrecalls. So I don't think being triggered is a bad thing. I want to normalize it. It means you've done some work, but there's still some healing lies ahead. And healing is not a dead end. I think it's a lifelong process. Because as your capacity increases, as you expand your capacity, you derive different insights. And based on different insights, you look back to your trauma or your traumatic history, and you can look through your experiences through a different perspective too. But you're exactly right. psychedelics allow you to uncouple your pain from what happened to you, and it uncouples your memory consolidations of who you think you are. We are not our traumas. They're just part of what happened to us, because life is grand. Life is big. We don't get to bend life to our will. So that's why it's a process. Going back to psychedelics, everything is a process.
So, do you believe that the psychedelics allow you to access the memory as if it was a true view of what happened at that point in time? Or like almost like a remote viewing of the event? Or do you think it's similar in that we're essentially remaking the memory?
Wow, no one's ever asked me the question before. So I don't know, right? There's no proof. There's no machine. There's no MRI machine that shows us the exact memories we're viewing. But personally, I think it's closer to like a bird's eye view. I think you get to review the archives of what happened to you in a more unbiased, objective way. It's like watching a movie almost. It could be a first-person POV or a third-person POV. But in terms of, is it actually untainted memories when you're doing psychedelics? Or you're just simply viewing through the memories through a more uncoupled view? It's hard for me to tell. But next time I do a guided, or if I do it myself, I'll look into it and I'll look in for more research. But I haven't come across any research or experience that tells me exactly like to differentiate what type of memories are we accessing.
Yeah, I mean, I got thinking about that as you were speaking in our earlier conversation about the 1960s use of psychedelics in research. I mean, the CIA, our government, they were using psychedelics and this remote viewing perspective of trying to actually get people into these think tanks and trying to view points in the past or future or even at the present time in places across the globe, and really trying to delve into what is the true power of the mind. And the research was fascinating, right? But so much of it couldn't really be documented because it was experiential. And the thing that I have heard and that I also feared when exploring psychedelics is that people are worried if they get to thinking about the trauma they experienced, that they will essentially be reliving it or that they will be re-traumatized, like a new PTSD will erupt from it. And I think it's almost like that same fear of, oh, well, if I delve into this, maybe I find out that I'm bipolar and my brain is never coming back to center again. So I don't know. I'd love your perspective on that. And then I do want to dig into possibility because I know there are certain legalities that are getting looser. Like I'm seeing ads on Facebook for guided ketamine, like psychotherapies and things like that in California. I don't know how broadly available those are. And I also question, are microdosing with mushrooms or taking a guided journey, like access to this? Do you know if it's real and it's not laced with something? And how do you even go about that? And just really love for you to provide your perspective on these two things.
So would you like for me to start from your second question or the first question in terms of the best way to access this? Like you say, it is getting a little bit more available with a little bit loosened restrictions? Or
let's start there. Yeah, let's start there.
So again, I don't know exactly where everyone is listening this from. And as you said, the biggest issue with the legality is the limitations of access. And access is the biggest privilege, period. Access to information like podcasting like ours. Access is the biggest privilege, full stop. So in California, ketamine is already legalized. Ketamine is the only approved legal clinical therapeutic for PTSD. But according to research, ketamine has like the least sustained efficacy. What that means is it works, but you need to reapply it every week or every 2 weeks. But it is a good entry point. It's low pressure, low commitment, so to speak. If you simply go off of based on ads on Facebook, Instagram, what may, it's very hard. And with the rise of misinformation and disinformation, even vetting has become extremely difficult to parse through what is actually true. And AI has made it even more difficult, the content AI machines, right? So I really feel that. And that's why I want to preface this by saying that you have to go through someone that you know. So the safest way is going through word of mouth or internal referral within your network. But then you might ask, what if you don't know anyone in your network or anyone within your vicinity to have that access? Then you can go to Johns Hopkins MAPS, MAPS, all capital. It lists some resources and potential navigations areas you can look into it. But the best way is, like I said, you want to go for accredited institutions. So psychedelics are utilized in, I believe, in about 13 countries worldwide. As in, ketamine is legal and certain entry points are possible. So you want to first thing look up practically accredited psychedelic treatment center. You can Google it, whatever browser you use, and I'm sure a list of them will come up. And call them. Go to their websites, look at the founders, look at their scientific backing. Do they have MDs? Do they have PhDs on their board? Are they clinicians? Are they licensed? Are this accredited nonprofit? Or is this for-profit? Who is behind this funding? All these information should be public, so do your own research and parse through that. And then you can call them. Most treatment centers offer free consultation for about 15 to 30 minutes. Ask a lot of questions. And then look up podcasts who are hosted by accredited experts in the field of psychedelic healing. And then look for some of the criteria. So create a list and look at what are some of the non-negotiable you should have, the guidelines. Do they offer comprehensive assessments like we talked about? The guardrails. Do they acknowledge the red tapes? It's the same thing when you're parsing through research. And again, even with peer review research, I know you're in your doctorate process. That's also very convoluted now. So even peer review research cannot escape this era of misinformation, disinformation. But you want to look at who's behind it and who's the source. And don't go for sites or places. So let me simplify this. If any place or any air quote group offers guaranteed results with no guidelines, with no limitations, disregard, run away. Any peer-reviewed research article says if they do not talk about limitations in their articles, run away. You can just see that from the abstract. Because every research and control study, even RCT, has limitations. So true professional places should acknowledge the limitations and guidelines and red tapes first and foremost. So these are some of the 4 or 5 things you can look for wherever you are. But unfortunately, because of legalities, if they don't have those places and if it's really difficult for you to access, it's probably better for you to not go to the undergrounds and seek out these molecules by yourself. Because the possibilities are small, but that 1% has a lot of great disproportionate risk.
I'm glad you said that, because you'll even hear horror stories of fentanyl being laced into things like, college kids are buying pizza with drugs delivered with it and had some drug that they thought was one thing ended up being another and lost their life for it. So, this is something that's serious, especially if you're trying to heal yourself and you don't know where to start and you end up trusting something without really checking it out. So, especially when you're talking about what's marginally legal, like you might be able to, in a particular state, use something because it's been decriminalized, but it's still at risk for being contaminated or not being what you think it is. And I think that's a particular problem too in the MDMA world, or Molly, ecstasy, whatever you want to call it. Often there's a lot of speed in that, and that could exacerbate some other conditions that you might have. It's more methamphetamine than, something else. And so I think it's powerful that we talk about this and at least get people thinking critically before they embark on a journey, especially if they're trying to get better in the process. It's not about running away anymore. It's trying to get better, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's actually a good, perfect segue to your first question, right? So what if I do this powerful, amazing modality that Corinna and Benoit talk about? I'm interested. I have access in my city. I have the privilege of state legalities that allows it to happen. I'm going to try this out. If that's the case, you do all your process like we talked about, amazing. You're about to embark on a truly reality-breaking, life-changing journey. Even Steve Jobs accredited a lot of his creativity and the success of Apple to his psychedelic journey, in addition to his studies in India, of course. So I want to bring back why a guide is a must. It's not a choice, not an afterthought. It's a must. And they're not cheap because we're not able to provide the supply and the demand, basic economics. So they're fairly expensive, but you need a guide. Here's why. Based on your level of awareness and cultivated practices, again, psychedelics is like a rocket ship strapped or a GPS system strapped on a rocket ship. You know you're going somewhere far, but you don't know where you're going exactly. So the role of a guide, simply put, is an anchor. Your guide is the bridge between this reality you live in versus the ethers you're going to enter, this alternative reality. And every time you feel lost, anytime a scary memory that you've been suppressing or repressing unknowingly will get triggered and will resurface through this neuroplastic state. Psychedelics reactivates and expands your neuroplasticity. It just means neuropathways in your brain, and neuroplasticity is the bedrock for all habit formation. So people who have bad trips, all of us heard horror stories. Like you said earlier, people jumping off the cliff, people jumping off of a third floor apartments. I actually knew someone from college who jumped off a building because he did 3 types of acid, which is an insane amount of dosage. What if I have a bad trip? Benoit, what do I do? How do I get back? How do I not get additional PTSD from trying to heal my PTSD, like you said? A guide will guide you through that. I will typically say something like this in my own private psychedelic work with some of my clients. I would say, hey, Corinna, what are you seeing right now? You see a door? I want you to slowly move through the door. See what that means to you. What does that symbolize to you? Have you seen that door before? What do you think it means? It's all Socratic questioning. I'm not telling you anything. I'm not giving you advice. Because when you're under neuroplastic states, you're extremely malleable. That's what neuroplasticity is. So a lot of professionals lose their licensure and go to prison because they do sexual assaults or weird things under other patients who are subdued under the neuroplastic state. Because you're almost like you're the lights in the dark. They're navigating this darkness and this new, vulnerable, and very potent experience. So you're the guiding light. You tell them that, hey, you're fine. You're safe here. I'm here with you. Follow my voice. Be grounded and centered. You're not going to get lost. Well, you don't tell them anything because anything you say will get encoded. And this is the reason why your intention setting is so important. Because you're under this neuroplastic state, under psychedelics, the entire durations, your mind is wide open to whatever information that comes in. So the intention you set in the beginning encodes, this is very esoteric, but it gets encoded into your subconsciousness, which then manifests during your trip or your experience. So that's why guide is a must. It's the bridge between the current reality versus the alternative reality you're going to traverse to. And you need that bridge because the journey will get rocky. But it's a good type of rockiness as long as you have a rope and a safety vest that you can rely on. That's why you need a guidance. And through this guidance, that's how you prevent from having a second PTSD from your healing journey.
I could see all of that very clearly as you described it. Like I was getting visuals, I was even getting potential memories. Like perhaps you're around somebody who's just a ball of negativity and you choose to go on this drug journey with them, and their negativity kind of creeps into your world and gets encoded in how you're thinking. I've never had a bad trip. I've questioned whether I'm capable of having one because of the fact that I seem to come at hallucinogenics from this perspective of curiosity. And I've been around people who've had very bad trips and suddenly think their bodies were time bombs and they were going to explode or something to that effect. An intensely uncomfortable thing to be around somebody who is experiencing that, especially if you have a mind full of LSD too. So, I mean, I think dosage is important. Like, as you talked about that, as someone taking far too much. Sometimes if you're in the recreational world, people are saying, I'm taking 2, well, I'm taking 3, I'm taking 4. And there's no way you would need more than, maybe 1 or 2. Not to get into dosage and all of that, because again, we're not advocating for that. But to understand what this drug can do and how much you would need to be a tool as opposed to something else. And also just to understand you've got somebody there to be your anchor. I really love that perspective. As I was thinking about this, as you spoke, I thought about some of the moments in my life where I had somebody My ex-stepmother is an example. She was incredibly abusive in a verbal capacity. She would tell me negative things about myself all the time. And sometimes I would think about those moments when I was under the influence. And even thinking about those moments when I was under the influence seemed to make them more true to me. So again, I think having a guide to work through them. That wasn't somebody from the outside telling me something. It was me recalling a moment while I was under the influence. And it impacted me more negatively as a result. I mean, I think you and I come from this same point of perspective, which is that language is powerful. Words are powerful. And your experiences can be truly powerful. They can be powerful in a positive way and also in a negative way. And having the ability and the foresight to be able to walk through life, understanding in some cases that they're just words and you can dismiss them. And in other cases that they're meaningful and they're powerful and they're going to help you and guide you and aid you and be able to bring those into your world view, your self-perspective. I mean, that to me is what therapy is about, right? And literally this week, for the first time since I was 15 years old, I started therapy again. And so I'm kind of like, all right, well, I'm ready to look at some of this again, anew. I'm ready to go back and delve into what I might not yet have healed enough from. And perhaps you like the triggers, but I don't. I would like to be free of them. I would like to be able to come at my life and my future growth and perspective, understanding, the impact of these moments of my life, but not being emotionally affected by them in the same way that I still am. And I believe that it's possible. I think even just believing that it's possible to no longer feel like I am, in a way, the prey of those moments still. It feels like that sometimes. I want to get away from that. So I just have to tell you, I've so appreciated today's conversation. And I would love to continue talking to you another time and perhaps going a different avenue, talk about something else. I really hope that those people who have listened to this show have got to thinking about their own experiences, whether it be traumatic or not, and how some of these things like psychedelic can be a tool for somebody who needs it, and that it doesn't have to have a stigma associated with it, like, oh, that's a drug, that's a negative thing. I think there are drugs that are negative things that people get prescribed and use every day. So let's look at the things that are the right tools in the tool shed. And if this is something that would be helpful to you, I hope that you have the ability to go out there and find the best path for you that could include something like this. I'd like to offer you the floor as we prepare to wrap to go ahead and either share a question that I haven't asked that you wish I had. You could ask and answer it, or some closing thoughts, and to tell people a little bit about the services that you might provide, whether or not they're, in quotes, as you had said earlier, expensive. Maybe you could also answer what that expensive perspective might be, because, that could mean a number of things to different people. The floor is yours.
So before I share the question that I didn't ask, that I think might be helpful, is I just want to share this to close out the conversation. We are the embodiment of all the stories we tell about ourselves and others. So let's be more intentional, be a little bit nicer, and a little bit more compassionate and gracious about the words, the language, and the stories we tell, especially about ourselves. 70% of Americans display more compassion for others than themselves, according to research in 2023. 70% of us are kinder to other people than ourselves. What does that say about us? So can we be a little bit nicer about the self-criticism and our own process? Because we're all growing in a different space. So intentionality shapes reality. So I just want to really talk about the power of language and why words really matter. The question that I was hoping, or that you didn't ask, that might be helpful, is what does mental health mean to me as a psychotherapist? And I'll answer that question because I work with a lot of male clients, all genders, all sexual orientations, but a lot of male clients come to me because they feel a little bit more comfortable working with the same sex gender, I suppose. And I tell them in the beginning, very first session, I tell them what I think therapy is. I ask about their own respective experience in therapy, because unfortunately, we are the vanguards of a lot of first experience, like first-time therapy seekers. And this is something I think very, very highly about. If I don't show up to the best of my ability, then someone may never seek therapy again because of me. That's why I give my best. And that's why therapist is part of who I am. Mental health for me means knowing and recognizing the fact that none of us walk this path of life alone. That's what mental health means to me. Because again, loneliness is a cause of depression. If you really boil down, deconstruct, using your word, what depression is, it's isolation. It's feeling of alone, feeling of loneliness, feeling in the stories we tell of ourselves that no one else gets me. No one understands what I'm going through. I'm all alone. But you're not. AA meetings, 12 steps are powerful because you learn that, holy crap, I'm not the only one who left my home at 13. I'm not the only one who lived on the streets. I'm not the only one who've been abused by my parents and got sexually assaulted. Look at all these people have similar experiences and they moved past it. They're still alive. They're still fighting for another day. So if they can do it, why can't I? And that's the possibilities I think you talked about earlier. So that's what mental health means to me. And yeah, I mean, if you want to check out or have more conversation with this, I don't offer psychedelic assisted therapy explicitly because of different, it's a long commitment. I have to spend 6 hours with you for the session. So it's a lot of time commitment for me. So I only do that for people locally speaking. So you won't be able to reach out for that. But if you're interested in the insights I talked about, some of my way of thinking, I have a very active and restless mind. So I think about these things all the time. So if you thought, oh, I liked the way Benoit is viewing through mental health and trauma and healing, just reach out to me. Come to my website. You can find me on Instagram, social media, and I'm sure Corinna will link all those below. I don't have a book to publicize yet, but when the time is right, I'm sure that will happen too. But I'm just, like I said, I really think stories are powerful. We're all storytellers, one way or the other. So why not share some powerful stories that resonate with us? Because people forget, stories are visceral experiences we feel called to share. They're not empty words. So I find conversations very meaningful, and the arts of dialogues are dying in 2024. So this is my effort in changing that landscape. But thanks for having me on.
I have thoroughly enjoyed our time together today, Benoit Kim. And I will include links, of course, to everywhere we can find you, including your podcast, Discover More. So if people have not had enough, which I'm sure they have not, they can find that as well. And perhaps they'll also give a listen to your episodes with Kate Wallinga from Ignorance Was Bliss. They were great episodes, both you guesting on hers and vice versa. So I thank you for that. And I look forward to staying connected. I will also say, when you're ready to write that book, I know some people who can help you with that. So please do reach out. I also serve as an ARC reader for some because I have an incredible attention to detail and have been known to find errors that otherwise don't get found or little plot lines that disappear in fiction. It's like eagle-eyed sixth sense that I have. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on. Great questions. And again, thank you for honoring, spotlighting Kate Wallinga. Very kind soul, and rest in power to her.
Rest in power, Kate. To find out more about Benoit Kim and the Discover More podcast, see the links that we provide with show notes. This will take you directly to our expanded blog page, which includes not only the video version of this podcast episode, but complete transcripts and links to the other resources and past episodes that we discussed, including those with Kate Wallinga. While you once found all of this on Care More Be Better's dedicated site, you'll now find it at circleb.co. And while you visit, one more reminder, please do join our newsletter. For every new subscriber to our circle, we are planting a tree through our partnership with Forest Planet. CircleB.co is a cause before commerce, education, and resource for you. We offer eco-friendly products that can help you reduce your reliance on plastic, support companies that seek to do everything right, and make the world a better place along the way. We also are partnered with 1% for the planet, so 1% of every purchase is going to go to make the world a little greener. Thank you, now and always, for being a part of this pod and this community, because together we really can do so much more. We can care more, we can be better, we can lean into our potential and become our best selves together. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.